Hello, I'm here today to talk to you about the Beatles' first official recorded album, which is Please Please Me. There were others before that. There's a Live at the Star Club, for instance, which is recorded in Hamburg and has more of the audience enjoying their drinks and what have you than the actual Beatles music on it. I've heard a bootleg of it. I wasn't greatly impressed, but then again, I was only about 11 when I heard it, so perhaps if I heard it now, I might change my mind. But, so, we've got this. Now, we've got a couple of myths to break, first of all. It was recorded in one day. It wasn't recorded in one day. The two singles were recorded at different times. There were two versions of Love Me Do. One had Andy White drumming on it, who was a session musician because they decided that Ringo's drumming wasn't exactly all that they wanted, and he played a tambourine on it, and that's the one that is commonly available today. So you just listen out for the tambourine because that's Ringo playing it. The one without Andy White that Ringo played the drums on, I think that's on the 2009 remasters. On the Past Masters Volume 1. So we've got Love Me Do. Now there's a mono and a stereo version of Love Me Do. And that is available on the stereo version of the LP. I'll talk about that in a second. P.S. I Love You, which was the B-side, which is also on this album, I think they possibly got rid of the master tape, because the one on here, even though this is the stereo album, sounds mono to me. Now Please Please Me, again, there were two versions of that made. The mono is a different take from the stereo version. Okay, Ask Me Why appears to me on this album to have been fake stereoed. Certainly sounds a bit different. It's either mono or fake stereo. I mean, I think perhaps we'll see what comments we have on here about it, see what other people think, but I think it's fake stereo. So those were the 4 songs that were taped on different occasions. The other 10 were recorded all in one huge mammoth session, and the Beatles even worked through their lunch break, and I'll tell you how I knew that in a minute. And they got these 10 songs done. It's virtually unheard of, especially today. In fact, really, you'd be lucky if a lot of artists were there in the studio for a lot of the recording of songs that go on today. They might come in and sing it and then have their voices auto-tuned for it. But this was a mammoth session that was recorded all in one day. Okay, quick word about some of the technology that was used on this. First of all, they used, obviously, analogue recording tape. The myth goes that tape is bad, digital is good. The tapes that they used on here have survived. I mean, the masters are kept in a secret location that only a very few people know. And when they used them for the 2009 masters, they didn't even need baking. They were in absolutely top-notch condition to make those remasters out of. So yeah, tape isn't always bad. And they used 2-track reel-to-reel tape. They must have had more than one 2-track recorder, because as the documentation goes, and I'll show you in a minute where you can get a lot of information about this sort of thing, there are a lot of superimpositions and overdubs onto the original 2-track tapes. For example, wherever there's a harmonica, it's quite often quite difficult to play the guitar, sing and play the harmonica at the same time. So the harmonicas were added on later. And in fact, on the stereo version of Please Please Me, the song, at the end, the harmonica overdub is out of sync with the rest of the band playing it, which is why it goes into that very curious echoey sort of sound that up until then hasn't been evident. And it's because the harmonica's out of sync. Also on that stereo, please me, while we're there, they used a different take, and on the stereo take, some of the harmonies and lead vocals are different words. So listen out for that as well, because there were obviously a couple of fluffs in it, and I don't think anybody was particularly bothered, because at that time, certainly as far as the pop music market is concerned, mono was it, because the kids could afford mono record players, and stereo was very much a niche thing, a bit like our surround sound remasters of albums these days, where really and truthfully very, very few people have got them, and the formats to play surround sound, SACD and DVD-A, are by and large out of date really and obsolete. That's another topic. Okay, so going back to the technology that was used on Please Please Me, they used the 2-track tape recorder in sort of dual mono mode, so that they could have, it allowed a bit more flexibility when you were balancing between the voices and the band. So basically the band were mics were taken to one track of the tape, and the vocals were taken to another track, which sort of gives a very odd stereo effect, especially if you're listening to it on headphones. But as I say, my 80s reissue of this album, which is the stereo version, because they were only issued in stereo, I think. No, that's a lie. I think there were some pretty rare mono versions of these albums recorded in the 80s. I think my Hard Day's Night is a mono one, but by and large, it was the stereo versions that were prevalent in the 80s, and that's where mine comes from. And the stereo doesn't sound too bad as long as you're listening to it sort of on speakers, and you know you're sort of you're not paying too much attention to it. As I say, there are a few curious effects. There's obviously the ones that seem like mono and fake stereo. Also, there's a fair amount of compression that's on this album. Certainly, the opening bars of "I Saw Her Standing There," which are really, really, you know, they really jump out and get you. If you're talking about, you know, the modern loudness war sort of thing, it's similar, but in a much more pleasing analogy way. Certainly, I think Paul was overloading his microphone. The opening bars of that really sound like the microphone was going, you know, into, you know, verging on overload, if not overloading. They turned it down quite quickly though. I've heard the mono single of Please Please Me, and when the vocals disappear and you have those like echoey bits in the verse, it goes, "Last night I said these words to Michael," and it goes, "Dun, dun, 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 dun," and those little instrumental breaks come right forward and then they disappear again. It's quite an odd effect really, but it obviously did the trick in the 60s because it was #1 for several centuries, and you know, it launched them onto the market, as it were. P.S. I Love You has also got some curious sort of going up and downs of the volume, and the Beatles Anomalies site doesn't really explain what was going on there either. But certainly I would say that sort of thing is you know, pretty much like an anomaly. Other things to look out for on this album. Let's go through the track list. I Saw Her Standing There, which I've, you know, talked about, and it's a really, you know, eye-opener sort of, you know, introduction to the album, with the count-in at the beginning as well. Misery was another Lennon-McCartney thing, although listed as McCartney-Lennon on this album. Then there's the single, the cover version, sorry, Anna Go to Him, which I really like. I don't know who originally sang it, but I really, really like it. And the backing vocals where Paul is going, you cheat, you cheat, you cheat. It's just, you know, it's stunning. And we've got a couple more cover versions. We've got Chains, and is that George singing? I think that's George singing. It will say somewhere on the back here, because you've got this hypey sort of blurb on the back, which the early Beatles albums had. Up to, I think, Rubber Soul didn't have him, but certainly all the other ones did. Then we've got Ringo's song Boys, which is another cover version. Listen out for his voice cracking. In the first chorus, he repeats, "Don't you know I mean boys, don't you know I mean boys, I'm talking about boys now." And his voice does crack, I think, on the last one of those repetitions, so listen out for that. Then we've got Ask Me Why and Please Please Me. In those days, and I've mentioned this before, talking about other albums, they actually tried to make sure that the first and last tracks of each album were really strong ones, so you've at least got 4 really decent tracks. Side 2 opens up with Love Me Do, which we've talked about. It's not really my favourite Beatles song at all, but yeah, I mean, it's not bad nonetheless. P.S. I Love You, I think, is much better, to be honest. Then we've got a song called Baby It's You, which is a cover version. Some of their cover versions were very camp, the way they did them, and I think this one is fairly camply done. Followed by Do You Want to Know a Secret, then A Taste of Honey, which is the only track on the album that's been double-tracked. Paul's vocals were double-tracked on that one, so again, that would have been a superimposition, where they would have taken the main backing track and recorded that onto another 2-track tape recorder while Paul was singing the extra vocal. And I like A Taste of Honey. It's a bit corny, as I say. You know, some of these songs were really camp, the ones that they chose, and if you listen to the lyrics of that, you know, it really is not a macho pop song at all. Then There's a Place, which is a Lennon-McCartney song, and then Twist and Shout. Now you can go onto the Beatles Anomalies site and you can find quite a big discussion about who sang the R's in that. What is absolutely legendary is that the song was recorded. There were 2 complete takes done of this. The first one was the one that was used. John Lennon's voice was absolutely knackered by that time, because they'd been performing day in, day out for probably about 3 years on end, really. Virtually every single night they were out performing. And Lennon's voice was completely knackered, even at the beginning of the session of that day on the 11th of February 1963. By the end of it, he had really had enough. And the second take, Lennon's voice really was not good. But they did one just, I think, to be on the safe side. They used the first take. And at the end, you can hear what sounds like Paul saying "yay" at the end, because I think, you know, he's saying, you know, well done, John, sort of thing. And you can hear John coughing and spluttering at the end, and they kept that on, presumably for a little bit of a, you know, sense of humour sort of thing. You know, that funny thing where you sort of laugh. Also on the Anomalies site, there's a fairly anal discussion about who's singing the R's. Certainly in the middle break, where all these R's are overlaid on top of one another, some of them go a little bit flat, but it sort of picks itself up, and where John runs out of breath, he sort of breaks into yay, 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 yay. And he was reportedly stripped to the waist while he was singing that, fact fans. Okay, if you want to know more about Beatles recordings, then find this book. It's, I think, out of print now, but I got it many, many years ago and have read it many times. 1987, I got this. It's the Complete Beatles Recording Sessions. It's by Mark Lewison, who was, and probably still is, a Beatles super fan, as it were. And it lists every single day that the Beatles were in the studio, or when they weren't in the studio and mixing was being done. And it goes into anal detail about what was on each take. You've got facsimiles of the session takes and things like that, which is how I knew that, for example, there were 2 sessions of Love Me Do, and how I knew that there were 2 sessions of Twist and Shout, for example. It's all come from here. Also, the Beatles Anomalies website, which I've talked about before, it's called What Goes On. Have a look at that as well if you're interested. As always, though, the main thing is that it's absolutely brilliant music, and just listen to it, and you'll glean your own opinions and stuff like that. I do hope that that this has inspired a few people. Maybe if you've not heard Please Please Me for a long time, or if you've never heard it, go and play it. Once upon a time, I showed a picture of John Lennon to my nephews, who were at the time sort of primary school age, and I said, "Who's that?" And they hadn't a clue. And I think that it would be a real shame if a lot of our kids grew up not knowing who at least the Beatles were, because it's a slice of history, and with only 2 surviving Beatles, and many of the other sort of guys that were sort of their aides and hangers-on and stuff like that now sort of departed as well. It would be a real shame if the culture of the Beatles was lost. So yes, get this album out and play it, okay? Even if you've only got the stereo version, because the stereo version isn't all that bad. Okay, bye.